All right, welcome back. Now we're almost to the end, and I thank you for sticking with me throughout. I really do. And I can think of several reasons to thank you, but most importantly, because anyone who's made it to this point of my aha moment, well, I cannot imagine that they are not having a moment or two of their own, much less possibly awakening altogether, which is the whole point of making this. Without further ado, now where were we? Oh, yes. So in the previous piece, we were discussing how the defiling of humans' pure and holy seed line with Satan's purely evil seed is not the only seed having had been tainted. Now, interbreeding has been going on since, well, the beginning of our creation, with the watchers who fell, described in the Book of Enoch, chapter 6 through 10, and Genesis chapter 6, verse 4. Now, they fell before the flood and after the flood. A lot of people don't know that. They just think they fell before and then the flood just wiped them out. Not true, because a lot more watchers rebelled against Yah and they were sent out of heaven. Now, incidentally, Sherry has the entire Book of Enoch, which is yet another book that was maliciously removed from the Bible as being a part of the before-mentioned Apocrypha, on her site, which I've included in a link in the description for easy access. Now, if you're not at all familiar with Enoch's story, in a nutshell, but first and foremost, he is not to be confused with Enoch of Cain of Genesis chapter 4, verse 17. No. The Enoch I am referring to was the son of Jared, or more accurately, Yared. He was the seventh generation of the pure and holy seed of Adam's, and he is the subject of many Jewish, Christian, and Muslim writings. And after living to be 365 years old, as explained in Genesis chapter 5, verse 24, Enoch walked with Yah and was no more, for Yah took him. In other words, he ascended with Yah to heaven without experiencing body death first, which is considered exceptional and usually a sign of Yah's special recognition of the individual's piety, meaning religious devotion, spirituality, or a combination of both. But common elements in most perceptions is humility and religiosity. Another interesting fact to mention is that the entire book of Jude is talking about fallen angels, men of renown, who are not immediately judged, but left to fulfill their destiny in the last days with their offspring, as I had already discussed in the second segment, I believe, when referring to the first angelic civilization when Halael rebelled against Yah. And again, Halael is the angelic name for ultimately the angel that became Lucifer, Satan, whatever you want to call him. Now, Jude aligns with Enoch in that these are the same ones that Enoch had prophesied of, being the rebel angels and their offspring. Throughout the ages, they have sown discord, rebellion, and inspired false doctrines and religions to deceive mankind. Now, additionally, I briefly mentioned before that Adam had had a previous wife to Eve, only during his angelic form, which once again was removed from the Bible. Lilith had given birth to Lucifer's first son, Azazel, after Yah had exiled her from the garden and, more importantly, off the planet. But that wasn't her only child. In fact, she would have countless children, and it was primarily because, still in her spirit form, she was able to essentially have litters at one time. Would you believe that? Well, aside from the reptilian race, would you be willing to consider the fact that she is ultimately responsible for the creation of any living extraterrestrial known to man and not known to man? Like, for instance, Nephilim, Anunnaki, or some people say Anunnaki, tall grays, short grays, Dracos, hybrids. Now, the reason these beings are not visible to man on our 3D plane is because, again, Lilith was never removed from her spirit form, and she eventually found a portal that allowed her to visit Earth when the moon struck. And this is where she was able to fornicate with many men, including King Solomon, and make all kinds of fallen angel races on the 5D plane. The offspring of Satan and the fallen angels, aka aliens, with human women, resulted in giants, a la Nephilim. Even after the flood, when more angels were sent down for rebelling against the Most High God Yah. Now, have you ever heard of David versus Goliath? the giant, which was before his future Yah-appointed King David of Israel time frame, supplanting Yah's first chosen, King Saul, not to be confused with false apostle Saul Paul. Anyway, many giant cities were destroyed by Joshua, or better and accurately as Joshua, to reclaim the land of Palestine when Israel left Egypt. Now, movies today, like last year's release, The Arrival, were produced in order for us to become desensitized to the idea and to actually believe that aliens are nice, that they only want to help serve man. Now, Sherry stated about and pointed out, though, is that they are hiding truths because serving man involves our heads on a platter. Let me repeat that. They're hiding truths because serving man involves our heads on a platter. Oh, let me mention one quick fact. Hollywood is run by satanic Freemasons, along with any other position that involves any hint of authority or power, including our government all the way to the top. And yes, that includes the president. Remember before when I told you that Walt Disney is satanic? Well, he's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Satanism and Hollywood producing and anything else. Now, personally, I think they should rename the title to the President of the United States, because the shadow government has set an abundantly clear standard in which they select their presidents, not candidates, but presidents. You don't believe me? Well, watch the provided link specifically at the 8-minute mark, where George Green is told who will be selected as president 2 years in advance, back in the late 70s. So you can pretty much guess which president I'm talking about. So regarding all this Russia interfered with our election talk, well, for those of us in the know, it's not only laughable, but a complete waste of ridiculous amounts of money. But what else is new when it comes to our government? Fun fact for you here. The definition of democracy is basically the people rule the government. Now I ask you, does this government, who claims to be a democracy, fit that definition? No, I didn't think so either. Theirs is more like a screw the people because they don't know the difference, so they'll never know anyway mentality. Anyhow, getting back on track. There's nothing presidential about our presidents. You want to know why President Trump is getting such a backlash at every turn since winning the election, despite Hillary's fearless attempt at stealing it the old-fashioned way by cheating? Simple. It's because he is not following their script, which had worked for countless years before him, well, at least since the last president who tried to go off script and was the last president assassinated, if you know what I'm talking about. Now let me ask you this real quick. When is the last time you recall executive orders being thrown back into a sitting president's face, as has happened to Trump how many times in his first few months at the helm? Now, I don't ever recall it happening to this extent before him, but I could be wrong. Do you want to know why? Because all presidents before him, last assassinated being JFK, if you didn't already know, excluded, merely did what they were told, including writing up specific EOs, a la executive orders, so they were essentially nothing more than talking heads. Bobbleheads, more like it if you ask me. Only these bobbleheads had a unique characteristic, as they doubled as marionettes. What? I'm just kidding. They're actually doubled as hand puppets, as the cabal has their hands so far up the sitting president's aspiration, he couldn't see his lifelong goals if he pried his eyes open with toothpicks. Now, have you ever seen the animated film Ratatouille? I'm sure by now you have, because it's been out for about 10 years. If so, you know what I'm talking about, as the rat literally pulls the strings on the puppet chef. He couldn't even make a decent tasting broth without the rat's instructions. Now, every president we've ever had to be, from my understanding, at least a 33rd degree Mason, which, a position that high in the secret society, requires a blood sacrifice. Now, I could be wrong about that too, but I don't believe I am. But hey, like I've said all along, do your own research. Don't rely on what I'm saying, or anyone else for that matter. And whatever the case may be, now that I've already explained all about the Black Pope, You should better understand that our president is far from being in the most powerful position in the free world, as they'd like us to believe. Free. That's a joke. It's like the late George Carlin had said, and I quote, "They call it the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it." Think about that. Let me repeat that. George Carlin's quote, "They call it the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it." Now, Carlin was very opinionated, as most of you probably know who are familiar with him, to say the least. And I would have to agree with a lot of the awakened when I say he was shut up permanently. Anyway, where was I? Okay, so if the sitting president gives the shadow government any problems, well, they just kill him off and replace him, and most likely his immediate family members, with their ready-at-the-go clones, who are effectively waiting in the bullpen, to use a baseball term, a deeply seated Freemason sport, incidentally. What? You don't believe me? Well, just look at the infield layout alone. It speaks volumes. Does it look at all familiar to you, like, say, the Freemason square and compass logo? Is that an aha moment for you right there? Anyway, now you didn't think Abner Doubleday, the inventor of America's pastime, could pull that off without being a Freemason, did you? Hardly. Anyway, I'm getting off topic again. Now, we were discussing clones before I went off on a tangent. Get it? Tangent? Another word for curve? Yet another baseball term? Okay, I'll stop now. Well, from what I've heard and read, dumping in place of clones has happened to all presidents since JFK's heroic attempt to go rogue. Oh, you didn't know clones existed? Oh, well, yeah, sure they do. Ever since aliens, better known as fallen angels, worked in cahoots with our government shortly after World War II during the Eisenhower administration, who is, by no coincidence, credited for launching the space race and creating the Federal Interstate Highway System. He is the president who reached an agreement with extraterrestrials in order for them to provide the deep state with advanced technology in trade for keeping their presence on this planet top secret, and using our tax dollars, no less, to build them some underground, well, cities for all intents and purposes. Fun fact, Dwight D. Eisenhower was one of the last officers ranked as high as an Army 5-star general some 72 years ago. Now, some would ask, why haven't we had any Army 5-star generals since World War II? Well, despite all the wars we've been involved in since World War II, excuse me, I had to get a drink, I'm getting a little hoarse, they were never officially declared as such by Congress. Now, the last one to be declared as World War II, for that matter, and that was declared by President Franklin D. Roosevelt on December 11th, 1941. Shortly after Pearl Harbor attack on December 7th, 1941, which I've learned recently was a false flag. That Roosevelt knew of the attack beforehand, but hey, why stop an attack that leads to us joining a war that, and I'm totally speculating on my next thought, he had already had the declaration ready to go. After all, that's where the money is for the cabal. Makes sense to me. The cabal lends both sides the necessary money to fund their side of the war with weapons, vehicles, aircrafts, and such, for a war they'd secretly started, mind you, and they get our just-turned adult kids, some even younger concerning who lied to fight for the good fight, or so they think, to fight for them by enforcing a draft. To recap, they start the war, triggering it however they think the public will buy into it, who, as a whole, begs them to go on the attack. In that case, Japan. And they come off as heroes. Easy peasy. Well, anyway. As I was saying, every subsequent war since has been simply referred to as, get this, extended military engagements. And an officer can only be promoted to an Army 5-star general if, and only if, we are involved in a legitimate declaration of war. Now, the United States has fought in only 5 wars, the official war, in which we had actually declared war. Why? Why indeed? The best succinct answer I can give you right now is, well, it's basically because there's just too much red tape involved in this day and age. Case in point, in 1898, there were only 3 codified laws of war. Now, fast forward to 1998, and there were 33 codified laws. It's like they've made it so convoluted that nobody is able or wants to declare war anymore. Maybe they feel that after all the necessary I's are dotted and T's are crossed, that they won't be in the mood anymore. Sort of like when your mother makes you bundle up to play in the snow, and then naturally you have to go number 1, and by the time you get all unbundled and finish doing your business, you're dreading to put it back on, all your galoshes and such, so you ultimately lose interest in going outside because it's just not worth it anymore. I'm just spitballing though, I could be wrong. By the same token though, that certainly isn't stopping countries, especially ours, from using the seemingly available extended military engagement loophole of sorts, now is it? So why declare it if nothing really changes, aside from a lot less laws are involved in which you have to adhere? You can read more about that in the provided article entitled, "Why Don't States Declare War Anymore?" While we're on the subject, I have also included a link to another of Sherry's numerous websites known as the watcherfiles.com. It lists some of the late William Cooper's great articles, which I found not only terribly fascinating, but terrifying and mind-blowing at the same time. He explains in a lot more detail what I had just explained, and I highly recommend reading all of them. He not only predicted 9/11 would happen a few months beforehand, and bin Laden would be made into the scapegoat, but he's yet another whistleblower who was killed in an extremely odd incident, which in any other situation may have seemed somewhat normal, but not for a whistleblower. Now, if you can only read one of his listed articles, make sure it's the first one, The Secret Government. It's entitled The Secret Government, rather. Now, ultimately, what it comes down to is that the human race has been in prison since essentially the beginning of mankind. The only real question is, who will claim to be our next slave master, while most of the population remains oblivious to the fact that not only is it changing hands, but changing at all? Would you believe that there are at the minimal 2 groups who want to control us? The first is the cabal reptilians, who has been controlling us by keeping us in the dark as to what really goes on behind the shadow government, working within those shadows as we pay off their debts, and they in turn kidnap our children yearly via the largest child trafficking ring out there for satanic sacrifices. Not to mention are the biggest drug smuggler dealers we have in way of the CIA using military aircraft. So they purposely get our children addicted at an early age, yet just another strategy for their city to populate the country, much less the world. Now, the second cabal, known as the Galactic Federation Ashtar Command, is made up of Adam's first wife Lilith's offspring, which is also responsible for most of the hybrid creations to boot. Now, these are the ones to watch for, as they are not going to care to hide in the shadows like the first one. They will be coming in the way of the Nasera Gesera bribe in order to be invited, according to what Sherry has written. And I happen to agree with, since I've had time to do further research on the likes of members like, say, Saint Germain, who, like false Apostle Paul, is also revered within the Satanic Catholic Church, not to mention, quote-unquote, Jesus Christ, in way of Sananda, will deceive millions into thinking he's their Lord and Savior they've grown to love. Why wouldn't the masses think that? He is what the bride displays in all 7 sects of the cult known as Christianity. Did I forget to mention that Freemason Michelangelo painted the picture we all know to be, quote-unquote, Jesus Christ, which the church has immediately adopted as the real McCoy, in order to continue the malicious ruse? Still, to this day. If I had, please accept my apology. Now, as Sherry explains on her site, the tall grays are the offspring of Lilith and Solomon. They had a long-time affair. If you read Solomon chapter 2, verses 14 through 17, he taught her how to call upon demons and take control of them. That's why she is referred to as the goddess of the damned. Now, the small grays were just manufactured to be worker slaves to the tall grays. Chip-implanted robots, that's why they're hive mind, listening for the orders of the tall grays, who's controlling them. Just look at the defined ridges down the sides of the neck. You'll see that in humans, too, yet another feature of humans being taken over by aliens, especially TV people. It's everywhere. Now, chapters 2 and 3 in the book of Joel, or should I say Yoel, since the letter J, well, I think you know where I'm going with that. If you've been following from the beginning anyway. If you haven't, might I suggest you pick up from the beginning after finishing this segment, if, of course, you find it extraordinarily interesting. Anyhow, along with Revelations 9, those first 2 chapters of Joel really fulfill what will transpire amongst the fallen angels and UFOs. Now, if you read all 3 of those chapters, a picture really begins to develop. Not the one the so-called prophecy gurus sell you, but a picture of what it actually means and says. Now, both are described as happening in yet another of Sherry's articles entitled The Day of the Lord, which I've also included as a link in the description. Now, the Day of the Lord literally begins with a bang, described again in Revelations chapter 9 and Joel chapters 1 and 2, and several other scriptures listed via her aforementioned articles by the same name. It gives us a description of a monstrous invasion of alien creatures without number, described as giants in various sizes. It describes such a horrible time of torment, persecution, and death that people will try to kill themselves and not be able to die. Suicide won't be an option because it's Yah's judgment on mankind, upon the wicked and evil in the world, and other beings, other than being food for the giants, they won't be able to die by self-inflicted wounds or suicide attempts. Now, when is the Day of the Lord anyway, you might ask? Well, it's during the last half of the tribulation period when Satan begins his rule on earth, and the Lord begins his judgment on it over a period of 1260 days. Now, consequently, if you divide 1260 days by 30 days, you end up with 42 months, which is exactly 3.5 years. This is the back end of the full 7 years of the tribulation period, as the first 1260 days is when the Antichrist and false prophet reign, and they try to basically convince everybody and deceive everybody to join them. Now, most people take the word day literal, as in one day, but if you read all of the references that pertain to this day, not all events mentioned for that day could possibly happen during a 24-hour period. One judgment alone lasts 5 months, and that begins shortly after the beginning of the day. And as briefly mentioned a few minutes ago, Sherry explains how in Joel 2, verses 1 through 11, aligns with Revelations 9, which you can read in its entirety in her article entitled The Coming Alien Invasion and the 200 Million Resurrection of Satan's Dead. Also, a description link has been provided. Now, I'm going to go ahead and explain these 3 chapters. And first part of it is, Blow ye the trumpet in Zion, and sound an alarm in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord cometh, for it is nigh at hand. Now part number 2 says, a day of darkness, which in Strong's Concordance means secret place, and of gloominess, which is wickedness, in Revelations 9 verse 2. A day of clouds, which is often symbolic for supernatural people or beings, and of thick darkness, as the morning spread upon the mountains, a la dawn. A great people and a strong. Now, great, strong often terms for the fallen or hybrids, i.e. aliens. There hath not been ever the like, so that means they come into existence at this time. Neither shall be any more after it, even to the years of many generations. Now, obviously not referring to a normal army of men, if you follow along. If the world has never seen anything like it before, right? And never will again until further into the future, probably Satan's third rebellion at the end of the millennium. You catch that? Probably after Satan's third rebellion at the end of the millennium. So, in essence, they're saying that this is the second rebellion. So this is a cycle that's been going on for countless years. The first rebellion was during the angelic civilization. The second rebellion is now. And the third rebellion, now I'm speculating here, but is my guess, those who are part of the rapture or ultimately survive the tribulation will be angels that will be around for the third rebellion, as the angels in the first rebellion were around for this rebellion. And I'm guessing at the same time that, similar to the angels of the first rebellion, the second rebellion angels will be incarnated into the flesh, as similar to the first civilization angels were incarnated at this point in time. I know that was a lot to take in, so I'll let you chew on that for a minute while I get a drink here. Okay. So is that pretty clear for you? All right, the third part of fire. Now, in the Strong's Concordance, fire or flame means Yah's anger. Devoureth before them, and behind them a flame burneth. The land is as the Garden of Eden before them, and behind them as desolate wilderness. Ye, and nothing shall escape them, as in they destroy with fire. The appearance of them is as the appearance of horses, and as horsemen, so shall they run. Now horses can symbolize some form of transportation vehicles that can spit, beam, fire, like Revelations chapter 9, verse 16 and 17 states, or the fact that they can run in a pack or swarm. Now like the noise of chariots on the tops of mountains shall they leap, like the noise of a flame of fire that devoureth the stubble, as a strong people set in battle array. Now that could, description of UFOs or some kind of mode of transportation. Also the term strong and mighty, often used to refer to fallen watchers and hybrids of our ancient past, or packs, swarms. Now before their face the people shall be much pained. All faces shall gather blackness. They shall run like mighty men, termed Nephilim giants, if you recall. They shall climb the wall like men of war, and they shall march everyone on his way, and they shall not break their ranks. Neither shall one thrust another, they shall walk everyone in his path, and when they fall upon the sword, they shall not be wounded. Now, supernatural army, this is not a normal army, but rather some army of darkness of Satan's. Obviously, this is not the war of Armageddon. This army cannot be killed. They shall run to and fro in the city. They shall run upon the wall. They shall climb upon the houses. They shall enter in at the windows like a thief. That also to be alluding to abductions. The earth shall quake before them. The heavens shall tremble. The sun and the moon shall be dark, and the stars shall withdraw their shining. In Revelations chapter 9, verse 2. And the Lord shall utter his voice before his army, for his camp is very great, for he is strong which executeth his word. For the day of the Lord is great and very terrible, and who can abide it? Now Sherry explains that she has seen in the Bible codes about an alien and UFO invasion, where they come in a hostile invasion firing beams of fire onto the earth. And this is the same thing that Prophet Joel is talking about. Or it's the locust invasion of chapter 9, which is where she's been led to lately about this whole thing. Now he describes chariots, another name for UFOs, firing upon and burning the earth. It says they have the appearance as horses, not being horses themselves, of course. How else could the prophet describe such a sight so people could understand him? He used terms he knew to try and describe a future event, and that was all any of them could do. Use terms they knew to describe future events. You can't describe what you've never seen before and use that as an analogy, in other words. Now, in Revelations 9, it says, And the fifth angel sounded, as I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. Now Satan equals the fallen star. He is allowed to release the captives in the pit. And it goes on to say, and he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. Now the bottomless pit is the abyss. Sun and air is darkened, coincides with Joel 2. And there came out of the smoke locusts, another term for demonic or aliens, upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their forehead. And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. Again, you're not going to be able to commit suicide during this time, even if you want to. And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. And they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions. And they had breastplates as it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. Now some interpret this as helicopters, some form of transportation, again, as we said earlier. And they had tails like unto scorpions, and they were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. Now some interpret this as helicopters as well, some form of transportation. However, from what Sherry had seen in the Bible codes, it's more like that they are using syringes to enforce chip implantation. They sting people with their syringes. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon, meaning the destroyer. In the first woe, we see that Satan is allowed to lose his forces from the abyss. Loosen his forces from the abyss, aka the bottomless pit. They are to torment mankind for 5 months who don't have the seal of God in their foreheads. Death is impossible for anyone during this time. It describes the shape of the locusts as being modern-day helicopters. Think black helicopters, like I would imagine Apache, or some kind of vehicle of transportation. They use these helicopters or UFOs to torment mankind. Their leader is the destroyer, judgment from space. Now the next woe features a judgment from earth. One woe is past, and behold, there comes 2 woes more hereafter. And the 6th angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar which is before God Yah, saying to the 6th angel which had the trumpet, Loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels were loosened, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year. That's approximately 395 days, for to slay the 3rd part of men. And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000, which is 200 million. And I heard of the number of them. And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire, and of jacinth and brimstone. And the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. By these 3 was the 3rd part of men killed, by the fire, and by smoke, and by the brimstone, which issued out of their mouths. For their power is in their mouth, and in their tails, for their tails were like unto serpents, and had heads, and with them they do hurt. And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone and wood, which neither can see nor hear nor walk. Neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. Now Revelations chapter 9 depicts 2 different woe judgments. as we just went through. The first woe lasts for 5 months. The second woe lasts approximately 395 days, which, if you already know the year is 365, you understand that that's about an extra month after basically 13 months. Now, the first woe is from space, as we mentioned before, with Abaddon, the destroyer, as their leader. How do we know it's from space? Well, it's because it says the bottomless pit, which is the same as space. Interestingly enough, there is an anomalous object that travels around the sun, which NASA calls a comet, which is named, what else? The Destroyer. The first woe uses terms such as locusts with the power of the scorpions. They descend upon the earth as the scorpions of the earth have power. Scorpions are also used as a name for demons. This group of beings doesn't hurt the earth but torments mankind. Fun fact for you while we're here. The word NASA in Hebrew means deceive. Go figure. Anyway, some of their characteristics. On their heads are crowns of gold, as it were. They have the faces of men, hair as women, teeth as lions, breastplates of iron. Sounds of their wings as the chariot horses running to battle, tails like scorpions, stings in their tails, some kind of weapons. A scorpion is also another name for demons and the demonic, as we mentioned earlier. In other words, these are supernatural beings in supernatural vehicles with supernatural weapons able to inflict torment on mankind. The second woe describes the releasing of 4 angels that command an army of 200 million beings described as horsemen. They are released from the Euphrates River, which is on earth. They are beings with some kind of transportation. This is a resurrection of Satan's dead. Most have never viewed it this way, but that's what it is, according to Sherry. There are many demonic spirits being held in hell and on earth waiting for judgment. These spirits are what Enoch called demons. Now, in the last days, these demons will be allowed to host manufactured bodies to work in, and work with Satan to control and conquer the earth during his reign. They are giving horses a la some mode of transportation. The Lord uses them to fulfill his judgment on earth. Now, Sherry says that she doesn't know how many prophecy gurus she's heard that use the scripture to describe 200 million man army as coming from the Orient, who are then on their way to Israel. Yes, in Revelation chapter 16, verse 12, it states that the kings of the east will head to Israel. But Revelation 9 is not the passage that refers to those supposed 200 million. And nowhere in the Bible does it number how many of them there will be. As a ground invasion on earth, we have an army of 200 million demonic beings appearing, and with orders to kill a third of mankind who don't have the seal of God, or the Most High, in their foreheads. This passage refers to supernatural woes that will be afflicted on mankind called plagues. And plagues began with the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse with the pale horse, and continue on even unto the trumpet judgments of the tribulation period, or day of the Lord. These 2 woes inflict torment and death. The earth-based army of Revelation chapter 9, verses 13 through 21, is allowed to kill up to a third of mankind by fire, smoke, and brimstone. This is the army Joel sees in Joel chapter 2. They are not confined to vehicles because Joel describes them as marching. They cannot be killed, and they are running to and fro and able to enter into people's houses through their windows. So by air and by land, we are infested with 2 different supernatural armies, aliens from spaces, and the demonic from hell that attack and plague mankind. Again, you can read Sherry's full article on the subject. This is just to, how should I say, wet your whistle, so to speak. Incidentally, in a previous segment, I had mentioned how the Bushes and Obamas lied about being Christians, if you recall. Well, along those same lines, please watch the provided YouTube clip where Obama agrees that Jesus Christ is Lord after being interrupted during his speech. Now, I ask you, do you really think he agrees with what Christians agree to, regardless if they're using the correct name or not? Or do you think maybe, just perhaps, He's being maliciously deceptive by knowing who Jesus Christ really works for, that being Lucifer, since our Lord and Savior's name once again, and please use it forevermore going forward, is none other than Yahushua ben David. I think it's pretty obvious what he's really saying. And it seems as though the guy in the audience who interrupts his speech isn't aware of our Savior's real name too, or at least we're supposed to presume that anyway. Otherwise, Obama would have been in a complete loss for a response, stuck in a very compromising situation. My guess, though, is that the guy was nothing more than an audience prop to ensure everyone in attendance that Obama is a Christian. After all, this was happening right before the 2012 election while he was running his campaign. Oddly enough, he needs the votes. Anyway, when he was able to confirm as much by responding the way he did. Now you can bet, though, that he would never ever claim that Yahushua is Lord. That, again, is how Satanists hide in plain sight, all the while anticipating that the masses, especially Christians, simply continue to follow the traditions that their parents' 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 parents had taught them, that they don't become book smart and have their aha moment and realize what's really going on. That's where I and other truthers come in, hoping to wake up the masses before it's too late. In any event, the biggest part of the awakening puzzle that I just couldn't wrap my head around was the ongoing rampant pedophilia in the government and top-tier office positions in any successful business in general, including high-ranking military officers, and who knows how many presidents. Now, I know all presidents in my lifetime were definitely involved, including a lot of people's favorite, Ronald Reagan. But what are the odds they were all attracted young boys and girls? Wouldn't those odds be as rare as, say, if every college football player that was talented enough to go on to play in the NFL all just so happened to be pedophiles? Now bear with me. All the less talented players had been weeded out through the college program process, and none of them were pedophiles. So now those left to play pro all happen to like little boys and girls. The odds are astronomically rare at best, right? And then it hit me. I had my aha moment, another one if you will. It wasn't simply by happenstance that they all had that disturbing characteristic in common, but rather they were chosen to advance because they all did have that characteristic in common. Did you hear me? Those advancing didn't happen to have that sickness, quote unquote, in common. They were chosen because they had that sickness. Now hear me out. Stay with me on this brainstorming notion, no matter how far off the path I get, okay? Promise me. Okay, good. So, if you were to see a news story about a den of, say, grizzly bears mauling a group of people camping, that's to be expected to a certain degree, considering the location, environment, what have you, right? Wouldn't you agree? I mean, nobody will think twice when hearing about that tragedy, other than, of course, feeling sorry and awful for the poor victims. But say the part of the editorial that wasn't known at the time the story was released was the fact that a seemingly polite group of people had come up to the camp group a few minutes earlier, but then, out of the blue, they all suddenly shapeshifted from human appearances back to the natural form of grizzlies. And that's when they did those gruesome acts to the unsuspecting camp group. Now, bear with me still. So that portion of the story wasn't known until we learned that a kid hiding up in a tree the whole time, managing to record the entire horrific ordeal on his phone, ultimately had come forward to divulge what he knew, with hard proof. Initially, it was believed to just be grizzlies on a rampage. But then we realized there's a whole lot more to the gruesome story than we could have ever imagined. Well, I'm pretty sure that that's what goes on with our government officials, which, from what I've read, is most of Congress. These people appear to be terribly sick individuals to those of us in the know. But what if they weren't so much as sick, in the general sense, as they were simply doing what comes naturally to their serpent seed-line satanic selves? And the only reason we even consider them to be sick is because they can take the form of a pure, holy seed-looking human of Yah's. Now, as I stated before, The serpent seed dominates any position of power, wealth, fame, fortune in the world. That's how they got to those heights in their respective fields in the first place. Just like my football scenario. It's not that they all happen to be pedophiles, but rather they are chosen for such esteemed positions because they are out of the seed line who prey on young children for, what I've heard, is power. Now we should consider it as a prerequisite to even get to those high-ranking positions. The holy pure seed humans of Adam and Seth and such, well, to put it bluntly, we don't even come close to qualify to sniff the qualification form for qualifying, much less being even considered for an actual candidate, which is fine by me. I don't care about this world to want to know what is all involved with making a successful mark in a way of wealth anyway. Now, before I go any farther, please do not even consider for a second that I'm condoning what goes on in the hierarchy pyramid by any means. That I'm somehow giving them a pass like the grizzly bear. I want to make that clear right up front. I just think this brainstorming explanation somewhat sheds a little more light when considering why they are really doing the horrifically appalling things they do, which appears to humans as unbelievably heinous. Bottom line, they are not human, or at least not full human, but hybrid, nor do they have our conscience, which is Yah given. They are not connected to my God Yah, but rather their God Lucifer. So they are essentially sociopaths who don't experience guilt or anything of the sort that would indicate they would ever regret what they're doing, similar to Revelations chapter 16, verses 9 through 21. To put it bluntly, it's in their nature, plain and simple. For example, it probably comes as natural to them as, say, the excitement and sometimes extremely odd behavior football fan humans express when the new NFL season begins. We just know how to control our emotions more because we have a Yah-given conscience that keeps us in check. Well, most of us anyway. That leads me to my next topic. One of the most repeated questions I feel has been asked since the beginning of time is, well, I guess you'll just have to proceed to what is most likely the last part, being 8, to find out the answer. Now, if this is where you depart, that's cool, no hard feelings. But, I mean, you've come this far, right? Why stop now when you've invested thus far, and you're clearly feeling something that might very well be resembling a wake-up call of sorts, right? That's your call. You can answer the alarm, or continue hitting snooze, and simply go back to sleep. But I'm telling you right now, you may not hear another alarm go off before it's too late. Regardless of your decision, Yah bless.